essentially saying no to the way things are operating now, and wake up, Americans, because there is a regulation coming that really will change the way we are all supposed to think about private citizens' data.
So what happens if these big companies choose to ignore what Europe does?
I don't think they're going to be honest. Let's face it, some of these companies have at least as many European customers as U.S. customers, and these aren't silly boys and girls running these companies. So I think they're going to begin to put in place some of the provisions of the General Data Protection Regulation. That includes a right to be forgotten, for example, a demand that companies know where their data is, several other principles that are core to the GDPR. Quite frankly, there should be some pressure on the U.S. government to come up with something that looks and feels like the GDPR for American citizens as well.
Of course, that isn't going to happen. The NSA has the right, under certain circumstances, to any of the data that's being stored in any of thousands of U.S. companies.
That's right. And the U.S. Congress has the authority to change how that's actually interpreted. If, in fact, those kinds of provisions aren't recognized by the U.S. government, then this is really going to be a tidal wave. The GDPR has a very powerful provision that says that, listen, company, wherever you are headquartered in the world, if you are actually serving European customers and you violate this new law, you could be liable for a penalty of between 2% and 5% of your global revenues. That is a very, very heavy stick.
Now, you work in this area. It always struck me that regulations on the internet are very nearly unenforceable.
These rules are definitely enforceable. Things are unenforceable if you simply cannot identify the violator. But more than ever, we can identify the violator, and more than ever, we can use data to say there has been a violation. The internet is a much less Wild West place in 2015 than it was when I developed my first web company more than 20 years ago. We're going to have to give the individual who uses the internet greater controls over how their personal and private information is used. This issue is really about sovereignty. That is, can you guarantee government that I actually elect? Can you guarantee that you're really protecting my rights? And if you're saying, no, we essentially give that up to somebody across the pond whom you don't elect and whose government you have no real influence over, that's not right. If the reverse were happening, I guarantee you the Americans wouldn't go quietly into the night on this.
And so the moral of this decision is, take that, America. There's a whole lot more coming down the pipe.
That's one way to think about it. The other way is to say, wake up, America, and get engaged in the conversation about bringing greater sense to the way that companies deal with individuals' private data. Because the U.S. leads the cloud services market, it should be leading this debate. At the moment, it's following.
James, thank you very much.
My great pleasure.
James Kinsella is a former Microsoft exec who runs the European cloud services company ZetaBox.
Coming up, a requiem for a rite of passage, the Playboy Playmate.
This is On the Media.
On the Media is supported by Canon USA, offering the Canon Digital Learning Center, featuring how-to content like articles, blogs, and videos for photographers of all experience levels. More at learn.usa.canon.com.
I'm Brooke Gladstone, not a morning person. I wake up with mental cobwebs swept cleanly away by Morning Edition on WNYC. Concise news about everything from what my elected leaders are up to whether I need an umbrella. Another thing, Morning Edition serves it all up with a bracing shot of respect. Works like an espresso. Every morning on 93.9 FM, AM 820 and WNYC.org.
WNYC support comes from Columbia University School of Continuing Education, hosting online and on-site info sessions for full and part-time professional graduate programs, certification programs, and courses. ce.columbia.edu/WNYC. The Public Theater, presenting Gob Squads Before Your Very Eyes, depicting 7 young lives lived in fast forward, now through November 29th. Tickets and more information at publictheater.org.
This is On the Media. I'm Bob Garfield.
And I'm Brooke Gladstone. This week, Playboy dropped, well, a bombshell.
If you read Playboy for the articles, good news. You got to be less distracted than ever. The magazine is covering up. Finally, no more nudes. What a relief. Others are upset.
Yes, according to the New York Times, the magazine's circulation had plummeted from its peak of 5.6 million 40 years ago to about 800,000 this year. But the decision to cut the nudity from print, starting March of next year, seems almost counterintuitive. After all, doesn't sex sell? Not lately. When Playboy revamped its website last year and made it safe for perusal at work, its web traffic nearly quadrupled from 4 million monthly users to 16 million, and the average age dropped from 47 to just over 30. So there may be some market value in that decision, but it's perplexing, and I don't know, maybe a wee bit sad. The nation's mid-century mode of transgression is fading into history with the generation that birthed it, like Burma Shave and Network News. Diane Hansen is the sexy book editor at Taschen Publishing and the author of a 6-volume history of men's magazines. She says that Playboy did not exactly pioneer the titillating genre.
The first real men's magazine in America started in 1919 was Captain Billy's Whiz Bang. It was named after a World War I bomb. These were bombshells and just had little line drawings of flappers. It progressed into the 20s, and the 20s was a very liberal period. There was a magazine called Sex Magazine. It had nude women in there. There was also a lot of sexual experimentation that went on during the 20s. In the 1930s, right around the time that Prohibition was repealed, they decided to clean up the magazines. Like, okay, they're going to go back to drinking. We can't have 2 vices going on. So we're going to get all these dirty magazines off the stands, and at that point, magazines went to just text. Inside were spicy fiction, and on the outside were beautiful painted pinup covers. Into the 40s, people went off to war, and even going back to World War I, there were high VD rates. What are we going to do? How are we going to keep these guys from becoming incapable of fighting by being laid low with VD? And the U.S. government got the idea, well, maybe if we give them pinups and magazines and something to keep their little hands busy. So suddenly, girly magazines were very popular. They weren't nude, but the magazines had photographs of women dressed in lingerie, dressed in bathing suits, and much more voluptuous women. And when the guys got out of the war, after this barrage of pinups, they were kind of missing it all.
And is that where Hef comes in?
So you have Hugh Hefner, who served his time in World War II sitting behind a desk stateside because he had writing ability. His favorite magazine, and every enlisted man's favorite magazine, was Esquire, where you had pinups by George Petty and Alberto Vargas.
Ah, Vargas, who went on to a long career at Playboy.
Exactly. Hugh Hefner loved Vargas, but he wanted to see real women in the magazine that looked like these Vargas girls, and he came up with Playboy. There were other very popular magazines that had nudity, Modern Man being the biggest competitor, a very well-made magazine. What made Playboy so different than the other magazines of the time was that Modern Man was rough, tough, guys involved in tough, manly, physical activities. And Hefner, who was the kind of man who wanted to lounge around his little apartment listening to jazz in silk charmeuse pajamas, whipping up cocktails, making some hors d'oeuvres, He's going to make a magazine for the urban sophisticate. And as he said in his first issue, we're not going to be out tramping around in the woods. We're going to spend most of our time indoors and invite in a female friend to discuss lofty intellectual matters.
And it was an attempt to incorporate, in a positive way, sexuality into the rest of the kinds of interests that a person spends their time on when they're not working.
I spoke to Hefner 12 years ago when Playboy turned 50.
Our notion of playing hard was largely bowling and watching television, and there's more to life than that.
But Playboy's tastes were so expensive. I mean, wasn't the Playboy philosophy therefore a little exclusive?
Some of the dreams and some of the gadgets were out of reach, but part of the magazine, both its sexuality and also related to consumerism, was a fantasy. A man's reach should exceed his grasp, else what's a heaven for? It's a motivation to dream.
In the Playboy philosophy, you quote from one of your most eloquent critics, Harvey Cox. Can I read you his quote?
Sure, of course.
Moralistic criticisms of Playboy fail because its anti-moralism is one of the few places in which Playboy is right. Thus, any theological critique of Playboy that focuses on its lewdness will misfire completely. Playboy and its less successful imitators are not sex magazines at all. They dilute and dissipate authentic sexuality by reducing it to an accessory, by keeping it at a safe distance. And he concludes with, "We must see in Playboy the latest and slickest episode in man's continuing refusal to be fully human."
Well, I think that's very sophisticated semantics, but far from being accessories. The romantic relationship between the sexes, expressed from a male point of view, is what Playboy is all about. It's what makes the world go around. The fine food and wine and the clothes and the cars and the gadgetry, those are the accessories. But the part that really matters is the connection between the opposite sex.
Here's a clip that we borrowed from your A&E biography. It's you being challenged by feminist Susan Brownmiller on the Dick Cavett show. And we'll run that now.
The role that you have selected for women is degrading to women because you choose to see women as sex objects. You make them look like animals. Yes, women aren't bunnies. They're not rabbits. They're human beings. The day that you are willing to come out here with a cottontail attached to your rear end.
We've been accused, obviously, of exploiting women, exploiting sex. I think Playboy exploits sex. I just think exploit is an unfortunate word. Playboy exploits sex like Sports Illustrated exploits sport.
Now, I noticed that you never responded to her specific challenge about the bunny tails. I mean, it would, after all, be antithetical to the Playboy aesthetic to attach a little fuzzy ball of cotton to your own tush, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think so.
But is that fair?
And that feminist diatribe didn't make a lot of sense back then. It seems very foolish today. And quite frankly, was anti-revolutionary even at the time. To be truly human, women have to embrace their sexuality. And that's all Playboy's really all about.
Back in the early days when you were creating that costume and that image, it wasn't women expressing their own sexuality. It was women putting on the costume that you had designed for them. This wasn't them embracing their own sexuality. This was them embracing yours.
True. That's what makes it work.
Hefner had the genius idea to get the girl next door. And it's an idea that we don't understand quite as well today, how forbidden this was.
Sexy book editor Diane Hansen. She says most men's mags, like Modern Man, usually featured girls that were, well, available, often strippers or prostitutes. They were naughty girls, not necessarily beautiful girls. Hefner directed his acquisitive gaze elsewhere.
The nice girl who worked in the office with you, who you had grown up next door to, who you went to high school with, who didn't wear a lot of makeup, that this girl you might get to see naked. This was just a revolution. Nobody had done this before.
As Hannibal Lecter famously said, you covet what you see every day.
Exactly. Making something that allowed the ordinary guy, the guy who didn't have muscles, who wasn't brave, the fantasy of being able to get women and be cool just by using his mind and by learning how to cook, how to mix drinks, how to buy the right objects. It was very consumerist. It just appealed to a wide audience.
Well, then let's talk about Penthouse and Hustler. Both were created to compete with Playboy.
Soon as Playboy sales took off, all the other men's magazines in America started copying the Playboy formula. They all got articles and drink recipes and toned down the look of their girls. But the more assertive guys, like Bob Guccione, he said, I see what Playboy is missing. I think that there are guys who want something that's a little more edgy, and they want to see girls who are a little spicier than the girl next door, not the old prostitutes and strippers, but maybe newer, better, younger, cuter prostitutes and strippers. So he came out with his magazine in England first, and in 1970, Penthouse arrived in America, and the first thing he did is he showed a little bit of pubic hair.
Mm-hmm.